Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Distance Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I'm the teacher Bronwyn Slade. If you'd like to participate live today, you are welcome to call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can also listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and the television at Bell Express View channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled Monday through Thursday from 10 to 11 in the morning, and we are wrapping up our 4th week of our 9-week course. At this point, you should be thinking about what submitting some work. The key questions are the questions to submit. They're listed at the end of each of your IL lessons, and you need to do all of them. Check your understanding questions, the activities and review questions. Some of them have activities, some of them don't, so make sure you're looking at the list. And explain your thoughts and your ideas in complete sentences to really give a full understanding of what it is that you're talking about. Make sure you're actually answering the question that is given. You can do this by hand or electronically. If you're going to do it by hand, you can write in your workbook, though the spaces are really small, so I'd encourage you to write somewhere else, though you can take notes in your workbook if you'd like. If you're going to do it electronically, PDF, Word, and Google Doc files are the ones that are easiest for us to open, though if you need to use a different file type, just let us know and we can figure out to make sure that we can actually open them. So how do you submit your work for marking? The first method is to send your work in electronically. You can scan your completed work if you've done it by hand and using a device. If you have an Apple device, using the Notes app that comes free with your device, or if you're using Android device, then you can use the Google Drive app that comes free. Both have scan functions that are fairly straightforward to use. I'm happy to support you if you're not sure how to do that, though taking pictures can also work if that's what you need to do. Then you can send it by email to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. And there's been a little bit of a change. So I am no longer marking for this class. I will continue to teach for this class through the end of this term. So for the next 5 weeks, I will be teaching this class, but my coworker John is going to be marking this class. We've just had some shuffling of our responsibilities. So his email address is jstradiottoo@nnec.on.ca. So connect with him if you're submitting work, send him an email and connect to see if it's the best way to contact him directly. You can still totally drop it off at our location. That will get it to John, no problem. So we have an outdoor mailbox at our 74 Front Street location, and we're the bright red building next to the post office where we have our small white mailbox. So just put your work in there at any time and it'll get delivered directly to John and he'll be able to get back to you as soon as he can. And then also you can always hand it into your DEC and your DEC can either send your work through the express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll free fax to 1-800-463-7852. Again, students are welcome to fax in their work as well. If you have access to a fax machine, that is not a problem. Either way, John will get it and get it back to you. So you can still connect with me through Facebook and all of our lessons are still being recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So if you want to ask questions, you can. I'm happy to answer questions or direct you to John if it makes more sense to talk to him directly about your questions. I don't know if John has an active Facebook. He does have a Facebook account, but when I went and looked at it, it didn't seem like he'd posted anything recently for the last few years. So I would connect with him through email or through calling the office. I'll give you his extension momentarily. But you can still friend me on Facebook as I will still be recording our lessons and uploading them to YouTube and sharing them on Facebook. So B Slate Wahsa and is my name on both Facebook and YouTube. And all of our lessons are still going to be under the playlist SVN3E, though I won't be marking them. Continues to be true that science is really visual, and so connecting to the videos is going to set you up for the most success. If you can't get to see us live through Zoom, or you can't access the recordings on YouTube, let me know and I can still send you a copy of the recordings. That is not a problem. All right, so if you have any questions or concerns, reach out to us. So I am still the course instructor for term 1A. So for right now, until the beginning of November, I am still the course instructor. So you can still email me at bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca, or connect with me on Facebook, or call the office at 807-737-1488. My extension is 2209. But if you are asking questions about what you're submitting, or wanting to know how John is planning on marking, you want to connect with him directly. His email address is jstradiottO@nnec.on.ca. You can still call him at 807-737-1488. His extension is 2210. And still, you can call us toll free at 1-800-667-3703. His office hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And he takes lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. So he was not available during that time, though you can leave him messages, I'm sure. So that is how you connect with John. And I would suggest going directly with him, as he will be marking your work. So anyway, it's a little bit awkward. I know, having two people is just how things have had to play out this year. So feel free to connect if you have any questions. All right, I still think it's important to position myself, as I still am instructing this course, and the way that I instruct is based on my positionality. So I have white settler ancestry, I have white privilege, and this means that my experience of education has been different and easier than many other folks. I now live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people. So I'm working to learn from this rich culture and people in my community, though it is a bit of a process and it is not something that is always easy to do. As an educator, I have lots to learn and unlearn. So again, this is a journey and a process, and I'm committed to it, but it is not something that comes instantly. And so if I'm making mistakes, or if there's anything that you think that I could do to improve, please feel free to connect with me and let me know. Our textbook is Eurocentric, and this is problematic. It does position the white experience as the sole experience. It ignores Indigenous, Inuit, Métis knowledges as well as experiences, and this is concerning and problematic. So again, I apologize for this and have been working to find other resources, but now that I'm no longer the marker and will not be responsible for this course after the end of term 1, this might not be a change that's happening. It is not something that I will have control over. You'll have to connect with John if you have other suggestions about resources that might be more appropriate. All right, so we are doing a Throwback Thursday lesson. We are looking at lessons 6 through 10 specifically today. So as always, answering the question, why are we reviewing today? Why already? And this is based on the forgetting curve. So the concept that the information that we learn, we forget rapidly. So after a week, after 7 days of learning something, we've already forgot 60%. We only retain about 40% of that information. And so it's important, now that we are in our 4th week of our course, to review, because we've done a lot. If we take this action of frequently reviewing, it means that not only do we remember more because we continue to review it, so we go back and over it, but we remember it for longer. So it takes longer for our brains to forget. We've reestablished and solidified those pathways in our brains that this is important information that we want to retain. And so our brain hold on to it for longer, which means that we don't have to review it as often. So we review every week or every 2 weeks or so to make sure that we can remember what it is that we've talked about already in the whole course. All right, so first we're going to go over the highlights of what we've already discussed. All the way back to Unit 1. So Unit 1, we looked at, in Lesson 1, the components of soil, water, and air. So soil is made up of air, water, and minerals, which comes as sand, silt, and clay, as well as organic materials. Water is a universal solvent, and we looked at the water cycle and also how acids, bases, and the pH scale all work within the context of water. And we looked at air, which is made up of various gases, specifically, or the most concentration of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Then in Lesson 2, now we looked at the effects of human activity on the soil, water, and air. So we talked about, within soil, we talked about deforestation, urbanization, erosion, chemical fertilizers and pesticides, industrial chemicals, and how all of this destroys the soil. We looked at water and how recreational, industrial, and everyday activities pollute the water. And with air, we talked about how burning of fossil fuels leads to air pollution and the greenhouse gases effect, which results in detrimental effects for all living things. Then in Lesson 3, we talked about the common methods of sampling and monitoring soil, water, and air. So figuring out how we know that what the concerning levels are and how there is an increase in things. And so we talked about with soil, the core soil testing and soil profiles. So what different layers of soil is and how that contributes to the health of the soil. We talked about water and how to sample it with the integrated core integrated sample. So taking a testing from both the top, the surface, and deep levels of water. And we also talked about boil water advisories and how many of them in Canada are in First Nation communities and how this is problematic and concerning, part of systemic racism and something that needs to be addressed on a higher level that is already being addressed on. And we talked about air and how stack sampling is done. So measuring what companies, what factories are putting directly into the air and measuring it directly at the source, and how we talked about the air quality index and how this measures the quality of our air in terms of having impact on our health and knowing where there's more pollution and smog and how that has an impact on those areas. All right, and then we looked at Unit 2. First, we talked about in Lesson 4, the cycling of substances in ecosystems. So we learned about ecosystems and how there are producers, consumers, and decomposers in ecosystems and each of their roles and how they are interconnected. We talked about how they are interconnected through cycles and how producers, consumers, and decomposers all use oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, as well as other things, but those are the focus, and how their use of them then gets cycled through the producers, consumers, and decomposers. And then we talked about how biosolids and how they are helpful and what are the concerns about them. This is our way of improving humans' ability to be decomposers. It's something that we are really terrible at. And so we are just creating more and more waste and taking up space and polluting our ecosystems. And so biosolids is one of the ways that humans are working on trying to become better decomposers in order to deal with our organic waste and make it something that is actually useful and returning back to the earth in a healthy way, which is part of the concern is that maybe they are not as healthy as we would like them to be. And how can we continue to improve them to make them have less heavy metals or pathogens in them in order to them to be healthier to return to the earth. We looked at Lesson 5, which is carbon footprints. And we talked about how to measure the amount of greenhouse gas emissions are produced, both personally and at a community or national scale. Within this, we talked about climate justice and how the white minority has the greatest impact, has the largest carbon footprints across the world, whereas the global majority are the people who are going to have the smallest impact on greenhouse gases, but are the ones who are experiencing the biggest adjustment due to the climate crisis, and therefore are disproportionately, I can't think of the word, sorry, that I want, impacted. I keep saying impacted, but they're the ones who are really being harmed. We talked about how to reduce carbon footprints, and this didn't fit in the end of our lesson 5, so we continued it into our first Throwback Thursday lesson. So just a reminder of that, and how individual impact is important, but it's also key to have structural change, and how part of how we have structural change is by the individual impact. So in terms of the companies that we are choosing to support, or the politicians that we're choosing to elect or vote for, this is how we have impact on structural change, which is really where we need to be. The majority of our change that needs to happen is structural change in order for us to have a big impact on changing the climate crisis. All right, and then we dive into lesson 6. So we haven't reviewed these ones. These have happened since our last Throwback Thursday lesson. So lesson 6 is talking about how human activity affects ecosystems. So here we looked at oil spills specifically and acidic precipitation in terms of 2 human activities that affect ecosystems. So with oil spills, kelp and seagrasses die, while some algae thrive and become excessive, which then leads to pushing out. It's like it becomes an invasive species almost. It pushes out other plants, and therefore other animals die because they don't have access to the food that they need access to. Then also on land, in forest, similarly, forests and land animals die due to pipe leaks. So the same way that if pipe leaks happen on the soil, then the leaching of that oil into the ground has an impact on the health of both the animals and the plants in that area. Then we looked at acidic precipitation, so how it increases some nutrients and then it also decreases other nutrients, which means trees and other plants do not have what they need to grow strong. They might be able to still grow, but they might be weakened because of the nutrients that is available to them. And then also lower pH levels, so more acidic water are toxic to some animals, which then dramatically changes food chains. So either the animals die out because the water is toxic to them because it's more acidic, or the animals may die out because they don't have access to the food that they need because the plants and animals that they eat are dying out because the water is acidic. And then we talked about recovery and how it can take years to decades for ecosystems to recover from both oil spills and acidic precipitation, particularly because these things don't just, it's not like it happens once and then it's gone. It takes a long time for things to either clean up, or there's also continues to be introduction of acid precipitation in these regions. So it is just, even if it's starting to recover, it just keeps having more and more acidic precipitation. And so we need development of laws that deal with things at the source. So instead of just dealing with it as a reaction in terms of, oh, we need to clean up this oil spill because it happened, you need to develop things that prevent oil spills from happening, prevent acidic precipitation from happening, instead of reacting to them after they already do. By then it's too late really to help these ecosystems to recover and to become healthy, strong ecosystems that will last for generations. In lesson 7, we looked at invasive species. So particularly with the effects, we define them and then how to monitor and control them. So with the effect of invasive species, we first learned about what native species are and non-native species, and how native species are things that have been in an area for centuries or more. They've naturally grown and developed in that area, whereas non-native species are things that have been introduced by people, by human activities, that then these species are not originally from the area in question. And then invasive species are also species that have been introduced by human activities, but not only are they not from the area, they are taking over the area and pushing out the native species. So either are growing so well that other plants cannot thrive in that environment, or if they're an invasive animal, then they are, or an insect, then maybe they are eating all of a certain plant or animal and decimating that population, and so therefore changing the natural state of the ecosystem. So we went through how this is monitored and how there are checking and testing methods for both native and non-native and invasive species in order to keep an eye on these populations and how they are influencing the ecosystems. And there's a development of a database for prediction about how things are going to be changing in the future so that we can be, again, preventative opposed to just reactive. And then once we've monitored, there's a system in place to control invasive species. So again, we start with prevention. That is our goal, is to stop invasive species coming in before they even come in. So that is ideally where we would stay. But if we can't prevent something from getting into a native environment, then early detection and elimination is our first plan of attack. So hopefully if we catch it early enough, we're able to eliminate the invasive species because it hasn't populated so much. If that doesn't work, then we work on having a system to contain it and manage it. So even if we are unable to eliminate it, maybe we can make it so it is not as invasive and does not have as detrimental of an impact on the ecosystem. And then from there, if we're able to hopefully contain it and manage it, then we work on ecosystem restoration. So we're working on supporting those ecosystems that have experienced invasive species, how to get them back to the health that they once were, and have the various species, the native species, introduced back into those environments. Then we looked at lesson 8, which is common environmental factors. And so we talked about the 5 major air pollution factors, which are carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, hydrogen carbons, and photochemical smog. We talked about light pollution, looking at ultraviolet light, and noise pollution, and which leads to eventual hearing loss. And then we looked again at soil and water pollution, which we've sort of touched on before, but looking more specifically at heavy metals, workplace chemicals, and pathogens. From there, we went to lesson 9, which was looking at how environmental contaminants that we just discussed enter the human body. So first we looked at the various body systems. So the respiratory system, digestive system, skin system, and circulatory system, as these are key to how we survive. And then we looked at how these contaminants are able to enter the body through ingestion, inhalation, and absorption through the skin. And how our body has defenses that we're able to defend against small amounts of these contaminants. But with higher levels of pollution, our systems become dysfunctional and we lose any defenses that we have because we're just unable to, our bodies are not built to manage all of the pollution that is in our environments. Then finally, we looked at lesson 10, which is how our human body reacts to these environmental factors. So we figured out what the environmental factors are, how they go into your body, and now we talk about how our body responds to them. So again, we looked at respiratory, digestive, skin, and circulatory systems, as well as the lymphatic, nervous, urinary, and reproductive systems, how they work. And then what are contaminants that affect all of these systems? The various systems have some that are more specific to some that enter that affect various systems. Then we talked about how our bodies react and what the symptoms might be. So how our bodies are losing their health and the diseases that are resulting from the contaminants in the pollutants and toxic environments that we are living in. So that is what we've covered so far. It is a lot. Definitely, we have covered a lot, and at lesson 9, we are just over a third of the way through our content. So we've definitely covered a lot. We will continue with lesson 10 in our next lesson, which talks about vaccines and medications and how those protect our bodies from the diseases and contaminants that are in our environments. But before we do that, we're going to just go over the key questions that to sort of have a little bit of a discussion about how to answer these key questions. Though, of course, I'm not going to write out explicit answers as I want you to come up with them on your own. So on page 46, check your understanding question 1. We're going to start at lesson 6 because this is the newer material since our last review day. And then if we have time, we'll briefly check out the key questions from 1 through 5 as well. So describing the effects of an oil spill on plants, mammals, and birds. We went through this extensively in our lesson in lesson 6, and there is discussion in your workbook as well to really talk about not just that they die, but really how do they go about, what specifically are impacted due to an oil spill. Then on page 48, talking about the ways that soil and water are affected by acid precipitation. So when it says, supposed to read that a local lake has undergone acidification, what does this mean? So figuring out if a lake has undergone acidification, what does that mean? Thinking about it in the context of acid precipitation, what do you think could that mean? And then how does soil change due to acid precipitation? Think back about nutrients. Then the review questions on page 51. So again, continuing to go back to both oil and acid precipitation. These question number 2, where it says create an illustration on a separate sheet of paper to demonstrate the relative volumes of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, an average school gym, an average house, an average classroom, and an average living room as listed on table 2.2. So go back to that table and really look at that part to figure out what it is that is asking you to do, to figure out what it's suggesting is how you can understand kind of what it means, how much oil was actually spilled in that particular oil spill. Remember when we talked about in this lesson that the Exxon Valdez is only the 14th worst oil spill in the world. So think about the fact that once you go through that and figure out sort of the volume amount of oil that is how many school gyms the oil would be equivalent to, remember that there are much, much worse oil spills that have happened as well. Then yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that really all are sort of the same sort of questions. So then looking at lesson 7, the key questions on page 55. So what are the criteria for living things to be a native species? So I don't know if we've talked specifically about criteria, and I'm not sure if this is in your workbook. So look it up in your workbook. I don't think it's something that we listed specifically. We did not list it specifically in our lessons. And you might need to do a little external research if it's not in your workbook. Number 2, when 2 or more native species require the same food or habitat, what is the struggle for these resources called? Give an example of this struggle. Again, not something that I said explicitly in our lesson, but go into your workbook. And then what is the difference between predator and prey? Again, not something that we specifically went through in our lesson, but I think it's something that you can figure out. On page 57, number 1, what occurs when an area or region is monitored for invasive and native species? This we did talk about in terms of monitoring. This is what we talked about the whole time when we talked about monitoring. And then for lesson number 7, you need to do an activity, the 2.4 activity on page 58, which in our lesson 7 video, I did walk through how you go about completing this activity. Really, you follow the instructions. They're fairly straightforward. If you have any questions about how to follow the instructions about what you're talking about in terms of a graph, please reach out and we can support you with that. And then you're going to do some analysis. So don't just make the graph. You need to make the graph, but you also need to answer the questions and do some analysis, conclude what you think connected to what we talked about. And then there's still the review questions on page 59, 1 through 11, which then just is more explicit, check your understanding types of questions where you're just answering direct questions, which a bunch of it we did talk about in our lesson as well as in the workbook. So then lesson 8, page 65, check your understanding. What are the 5 major air pollutants that result from human activities? I've listed those today, as well as we talked about them extensively in lesson 8. And on page 67, what are 3 common contaminants in soil and water? Again, we talked about these today as well as extensively in lesson 8. So then on the review questions on page 69, again, they're just mostly fairly straightforward questions to go into your workbook. The question number 13, where it says create a pie chart on a separate sheet of paper illustrating the data in table 3.1 that shows the percentage contributed to global warming of the 4 major greenhouse gases. I wouldn't expect, if I were marking this, I wouldn't expect you to make this a perfectly exact pie chart mathematically. If you can check with John if you're concerned about it, but I would say that if you give something that is roughly makes sense, is logical, you don't need to like get a protractor out and measure. You can to create a pie chart properly, but I would think that doing something that is logical is fine for that. If you do want to know how to do a pie chart, if you do want to do it exactly, you can probably do an internet search and watch a video to do that, but you also feel free to reach out to me and I can walk you through how to create an actual accurate pie chart. All right, and then lesson 9, check your understanding question on page 71. What's the difference between inhalation and exhalation? We talked about this explicitly in our lesson as well as in the workbook. And what's the difference between your trachea and your bronchial tubes? Remember, in my lesson, I had lots of diagrams, so I would go back to that and check that out to see visually, might help you understand where those are and what their jobs are. In then page 74, what's the difference between ingestion and digestion? Again, we talked about this in our lesson. And how does saliva assist in digestion? We talked about this in a lesson as well. So go back to lesson 9 if you can't remember, or looking at your workbook. The review questions on page 77, create a flow chart showing the respiratory structures air must pass through from your nose to the capillaries. So a flow chart is not something that has exact calculation. It's just sort of like where I start here, and this is where I go, the air goes, and then the air goes here, and then the air goes here, or the air goes here, and then it could go like this. And so a flow chart is just showing, is listing. It's not something that is like a pie chart that you have to do calculations to figure it out. My flow chart does not represent the respiratory structure at all. So don't think that I've done it correctly. And then there should be words in each of these explaining what we're talking about. So that's what a flowchart just looks like, just in case that's something that is not familiar to you. Remember, if you were just listening to me, some of these words might not look familiar when you're looking at the workbook, but look them up in your book. They might have definitions and a glossary at the back. And if you need to look things up online, feel free to look them up online. I did not pronounce everything perfectly well. I apologize for that. So you can also look at pronunciations to make sure that you're pronouncing it properly if you'd like. I wasn't able to find something. I hope to find something that would just have everything all combined in the same place to make it really easy. But I wasn't able to find something that just made it really straightforward and easy. So sorry about that. I will keep looking. I'm just trying to look to see if there's anything specifically that when it says compare and contrast, that means what are the similar things and what are the different things that. So number 10 says compare and contrast vomiting and the role of the liver in protecting the body against ingested contaminants. So comparing would be what are the similar things that both that vomiting and the liver do that protect your body, and contrasting what are the things that they do differently to protect your body. Yeah, I think that explains all of the things that might be confusing about that questions. So then lesson 10, check understanding on page 79. What is the most common contaminant that can affect the respiratory system? And what digestive diseases are a result from workplace chemicals? This is going to connect all to the various charts that we looked at in our lesson 10, which are all in your workbook. I took all the charts that we looked at were directly from your workbook. So all of that is going to be there. And then from page 81, the most common reactions your skin will have if it comes in contact with a contaminant, and describe 2 living things that can enter the circulatory system and infect humans. Again, those are going to come. You can look at those charts in your workbook and you should be able to figure that out from there. And the review questions. So a lot of this is going to going back to those charts that we talked through. I'm just looking through to see if there's anything that that might be confusing. But I don't think so. I think pretty much really look at those charts in detail. Yeah, those charts are your happy place. All right, so then quickly just looking back at the review questions from lesson 1 through 5. Again, this one has a pie chart question, so you don't need to do it exactly. Oh, this one, number 3, do you think one environmental sphere is more important than the other 2 spheres? Support your opinion with 2 or more statements. So you can't just say, I mean, you can, if you just say, I think water is the most important, you're not giving us any information. You're just making a statement. So you need to back it up. Why do you think water is the most important? And you need to give 2 or more statements, 2 or more reasons why you think whatever sphere it is more important. That's the most important. There isn't a right or wrong. You don't have to figure out which one is the right one. There isn't a right one answer. You just need to back up, support your statement. Okay. Moving on to lesson 2, the review questions on page 17. Again, I'm trying to see if there's any questions that might be hard to understand. a Venn diagram here on question 10. So this shows you this 2 circles that are overlapping. So this is what the Venn diagram is right here. They give it to you. So you write these words in the right place. So they say you may use each term more than once, but that makes no sense in the context of a Venn diagram. The point is that you use it once and you put it in the right place. So I don't know why they say that. So you say, is it a naturally occurring greenhouse gas? Is it a greenhouse gas that only is released from burning fossil fuels? Or in the middle here, is it both a naturally recurring greenhouse gas and is it released from burning fossil fuels? So that's why you only put things in one place, because either it is only a naturally occurring greenhouse gas and you put it here, or it only is a burning fossil fuel, released from burning fossil fuel, and you put it in here, or it's both a burning fossil fuel and a greenhouse gas, and so it goes in here. So that's how a Venn diagram works. Again, if you're unsure, feel free to reach out and we can talk about it a little bit more, just because they give you misleading information about how a Venn diagram works. Okay, on page 27 for lesson 3, again, I'm just looking through to make sure that the questions are easy for you to understand. That's what, instead of answering the questions, I want to make sure that the questions are possible. Remember, for the air quality index, what's in your workbook, those numbers are not accurate in terms of up-to-date information. But if you're going to use the ones, then I would just say things like, according to my workbook, blah, 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 blah. So it's a little bit tricky because the numbers are not accurate compared to what I talked about in the lesson, because I couldn't find anything that talked about those numbers. All right, so lesson 4, the review questions are just very short. There's only 6. But I think so on number 5, where it says using examples from your own experience for the producer, consumer, and decomposer. Your own experience. Once again, we're not looking for one specific thing. It's something that makes sense, that's logical. I'm not saying, okay, I want everybody's decomposer to be fungi. No, I'm saying, look, what are something from your own experience that makes sense about that are an example of producers, consumers, and decomposers. As long as you justify it, make it make sense. If you just tell me producer, blah, consumer, blah, decomposer, blah, I won't understand why you believe that those are producers, consumers, and decomposers. Give me details. And then finally on page 43, from lesson 5, looking at the questions. Here where it says, number 4, where it says, if you purchase a bottle of water from France at your local store, what are some of the cradle to grave costs that are not included in the cost of water? When they say cradle to grave, they mean from beginning to end. So what are some of the costs that from the very beginning all the way to the very end of that bottle of water? And then I think, yeah, I think that explains the misleading things that might be confusing in those questions. So you are still welcome to contact me. I, Bronwyn, am still the instructor for term 1, so I'm still here to support you if you need support. So you can give me a call. Our toll-free number at the office is 1-800-667-3703, and my extension is 2209. If you want to connect with me through email, bronwyn.slate is my email address, and it's BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. I'm still happy to connect you and answer questions if you need support. All of our lessons are still being recorded and put up on YouTube on my channel at Wahsa in the SVN3E playlist. So everything is still going to be there, even though I'm not going to be marking and I'm not really your contact, but all of the supports that I put in place are still there for you. In terms of who to submit your work to and who to ask questions directly about your marked work, John is my coworker who is now taking over that portion of the course and will continue to be responsible for this course for the rest of the year after term 1A. So his email address is jstradiotto at nnec.on.ca. Or you can call us at the office either for the toll-free number or our local number at 807-737-1488. His extension is 2210, or you can ask for him at the main desk. For John is his name. His hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3:30, though he takes lunch from 12:30 till 1:30. So if you have specific questions about any of your marking, any of your work that is being marked, if you're trying to connect with him in terms of checking base about something, please reach out to John directly, though I am happy to be a support if need be. Reminder that our office is closed tomorrow, September 30th, in honor of the Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So we will not be available tomorrow, though we will be available back next week, beginning of October. So thank you so much for joining me today. Good luck with getting your key questions in, hopefully soon, and Mwich.